For this video, I'm going to be answering the question, what is the best full frame mirrorless camera for both stills and video? Let's get into it. So this is probably the most asked question that I get. What is the best full frame mirrorless camera for both stills and video, also known as hybrid shooting? When I'm answering this question, I usually think of who's asking it, because there's usually three categories, and that's how I'm going to tackle this question on this video. So I'm going to be recommending a camera for three different levels. First, the beginner; second, the prosumer; and lastly, for the professional. My name is Mariano, and I'm a professional photographer full-time. I do photo and video. I've been shooting Sony mirrorless cameras for over, I don't know, so ever since this camera right here. This is my first one, the Sony RX1. Believe it or not, this was released in 2012. So I've been shooting Sony ever since. These three types of categories, beginner, prosumer, and professional, there's usually three considerations that these types of people are asking themselves before getting the camera. And those three things are cost, the feature set, and the speed of the camera. So those three things are, usually you're trying to navigate or trying to prioritize as you're getting a camera. So what I mean by this is the beginner will be thinking mostly about the cost of the camera. They don't want to spend too much, but at the same time get the best bang for the buck, get decent speed. For the prosumer, maybe they've been shooting for a while and now they're ready to upgrade. They're getting a little bit more serious, so they don't mind spending a little bit more money, to get that quality and get that a little bit more of speed. And the professional, really, they want the best quality, and also the speed is it's high up there on the list because you're using this thing every day professionally. You don't want to be slowed down. And the cost, unfortunately, when you try to get the best quality, the best speed, the cost will go high as well. So that is the criteria, the three criteria that we'll be considering as we're looking at these recommendations. I'm also going to be recommending only Sony cameras because, first of all, that's what I use. I'm not going to recommend something that I have never used. Second, Sony is more mature than other mirrorless brands, and that means they have more lenses. The lens lineup is more mature. You're going to have low cost lenses all the way to really expensive lenses. There's a ton of a variety out there. The last thing why I'm only recommending Sony is because when you're shooting hybrid, you really need a good focus system, and Sony system is really matured. It's really fast, and it's really good for both stills and video. All right, so I have my cameras behind me, and let's begin. So the beginner, what I recommend is this camera. This is the Sony ZV-E10, and I know you're already gonna comment it. You're ready to type, that's not a full frame camera. And hear me out, this is the only APS-C crop sensor camera in this list, and I have a very, very good reason. The beginner is going to want a low cost of entry. This currently packs the best bang for the buck that Sony offers as far as a mirrorless camera. And so this little camera here has 24 megapixels. It's an APS-C sensor, not full frame, but it can shoot 4K at 30 frames per second. You might want to do the slow motion type video, and this can shoot up to 120 frames per second, which is super slow, but you have to go down in resolution to 1080p, which for me, I don't mind. The most important part about getting this is this gets you into the Sony system. So that means you start buying Sony lenses. Getting into that system is pretty important because when you're ready to upgrade this camera, you can keep your old lenses. Even the smaller APS-C lenses that are only for crop sensor cameras, you can still use that on full frame Sony cameras in the future. A few things that I want to point out with this tiny little camera is, first of all, it's got a super simple layout. A few buttons, that's all you really need for a beginner. You don't want to get too bogged down with all these buttons. It has a nice flip out screen, so if you get into selfie videos, like YouTube videos like this one, you can get easily into that. It also has this cool zoom rocker, which you can zoom just with your index finger, and that's something that not a lot of cameras nowadays offer. Also, this camera has pretty decent audio. When you're close to it, it's got a set of mics here, and if you're ready to upgrade to an external microphone and get even better audio, or maybe a lavalier mic, this one has a jack for an external microphone. But the best feature of this camera is really the cost. Right now, you can get it for $600 in the US. What you want to do as a beginner is just get into the system, and that system should have enough room for you to grow, into, higher levels or more experience levels in the future. So the next question would be, what if you're ready to upgrade from this beginner style or beginner level camera? The next category is the prosumer category. So let's say you've been shooting this for a while and you're ready to upgrade. You're now a prosumer. First of all, you're going to want to upgrade from this. Maybe you want to sell this and use that money, to get your new camera. And for a prosumer, your needs are a little bit more different. You're willing to pay a little bit more just to get that extra quality and feature set. And the speed, you probably want a little bit more bump in speed. So for the prosumer, my recommended camera is the ZV-E1. In a lot of cases, this camera is the bigger brother to the ZV-E10, and the biggest feature jump is now we're getting into the full frame category. I actually have two different recommendations for the prosumer. This recommendation is if you're leaning more into video projects. You're still wanting to shoot stills and video, but if you shoot, you find yourself that you're shooting more video, this is the recommendation that I would give you. First of all, there's a big jump in cost. This is $1,900 currently, but that is $300 off the normal price. Right now, if you're watching in early 20 or mid 2024, there's a sale on this camera that's $300 off, which brings down the cost to $1,900. So a few features on this is only 12 megapixels, but it's full frame. It's basically a baby A7S Mark III, which is super good with video. It's got a lot of video features. So what Sony did is basically they took that camera and repackaged it into the ZV line. So it doesn't have the best materials or not as many buttons. It lacks an electronic viewfinder, but you're still getting the innards of the A7S III. So it's not as good for stills because of that low megapixel quality, but for most people that's going to be fine, especially if you're not doing it professionally. This has really big upgrades on the video features. It can shoot 4K up to 120 frames per second, super slow-mo and super high quality. And like I said, it's like a baby A7S III, but it's $1,300 less. This also includes an internal mechanical IBIS, which is image stabilization inside. So any lens that you put on here, even if it doesn't have image stabilization, even vintage lenses will turn into an image stabilized lens. There's also an upgrade in form factor. The qualities of materials are a lot better on this. It's not all plastic. There's some metal parts in there, and it has a familiar layout. So if you're upgrading from the ZV-E10 and you go into this camera, you'll notice it feels just like home. It also introduces a larger battery, so it's the Z type battery, and when you upgrade later to maybe an A7 series body, that battery is going to be compatible with those cameras as well. What if you are leaning more into stills photography? Then for the prosumer, I have a different recommendation. My recommendation would be the A7 Mark IV. So this has a bigger jump in price. This camera costs $2,300. So it's almost 4 times the amount of the super cheap ZV-E10. But for that big jump, what you're getting is a lot. This is a 33 megapixel full frame camera. It's way better for stills because you have a lot more megapixels to work on. It can shoot 4K 60 frames per second video. It also has in-body image stabilization built in. And the reason I recommend this if you're into more stills photography is because it has a mechanical shutter. A mechanical shutter instead of an electronic shutter is going to be very helpful for stills photography and especially fast moving photography. It also has better autofocus than the ZV-E10, way better. And the only downside I think for this is when you do 4K video in 60 frames per second, there is a slight crop that you'll notice. The other thing you'll notice is this has a big upgrade in the form factor. It's a fully featured camera body. It has higher quality materials, mostly metal. It has better ergonomics, better hand grip, and you have more custom function buttons. It maintains the flippy screen, so if you're using this for YouTube videos, that is also helpful. And it has dual card slots, so that is a pretty big upgrade. If you are just for safety purposes, you have two card slots that you can use. And another handy video feature is the full HDMI port. So in the other two cameras, the HDMI ports were the mini versions or the micro versions, whatever it's called, but this is a full-size HDMI. So if you really want to get into video and start accessorizing your camera, you can get an external monitor, that kind of upgrade. This is going to be easier to upgrade or to accessorize the camera. So how about the next level of recommendation? How about for a professional? Let's say you've been shooting pretty seriously for yourself, and now you're starting to get paid for your gigs. Honestly, this camera is a good starter professional camera, but if you want to step up to the next level, you're getting more serious, and really you just want more speed and more features, my recommendation for a professional is the A7R Mark V. So first of all, when you're upgrading cameras, what I recommend first of all is maybe keeping that A7 Mark IV. So let's say you've been shooting on that and you're upgrading to this. If you're shooting professionally, you're going to want to have a backup camera. So maybe you don't trade that in, you don't sell that, and you just keep that A7 Mark IV or that ZV-E1, and then you buy yourself one of these. Professionals really need a backup camera, so keep that camera. This camera though, what you're getting into is the best quality, as unfortunately it's going to have a higher cost. This A7R Mark V costs $3,500. It's a modest price jump, really. It's $1,200 more than an A7 Mark IV, but maybe also another option would be selling that A7 Mark IV and buying two of these, because like I said, professionals need at least two cameras. You need a backup camera as well. But what you're getting with the A7R Mark V is the best in class 60 megapixel image. So it's like an A7 Mark IV, but bumped up, twice the resolution. So what that gives you is the ultimate in flexibility. You can crop into your images and still retain all that quality, all that detail. You can also use crop mode, APS-C crop mode in video. That is super helpful when you need to get closer to the action. It has beautiful stills and video quality. And when Sony introduced this camera, they introduced their best screen yet. This is a hybrid flippy screen that turns into a tilty screen. So you get the best of both worlds. Personally, I shoot probably 9 out of 10 times with the flippy, not the flippy screen, but the tilt screen. That's just the way I prefer shooting stills and video. But sometimes I do have a need for a flippy screen, so this comes in really handy. The only thing I don't like about flippy screens is if you have a strap, this gets in the way of the strap. It gets in the way of the HDMI ports. So there's a few things, that's not ideal with a flippy screen. But since this is a hybrid screen, you get the best of both worlds. Also, this camera has the best EVF that I've ever seen. It's really big and it totally immerses you. So when you put it up to your eye, it's almost like as if you're, in the past you've been watching 1080p and all of a sudden you're watching 4K. I think I need to mention though, the only downside to this camera that I've seen so far is that it does crop in a little bit when you are shooting in 4K 60, just like the A7 Mark IV. I do have a few honorable mentions as far as like the professional recommendations that I have, and there's a few just quibbles, a few negatives that I want to mention, and that's why probably I'm not going to recommend it. But this first camera, is the Sony A1. And as you can tell, I have two of these because these have been my workhorse cameras ever since they came out 3 years ago, 2021. It's their flagship camera. It's their ultimate in speed. It's their ultimate in resolution and speed combined. It shoots at 50 megapixels at over, 20 something frames, 30 frames per second, some crazy amount that I don't even use. The biggest downside though, which makes it unreachable or why I would not recommend it, is it costs $6,500. That's the biggest downside. I mean, you're getting all their best features. The upgrades that you get on this are mainly luxurious, luxury type upgrades, but you'll notice it. Once you start shooting with an A1, it's so smooth, it's so fast. The EVF, it never blinks. It doesn't black out. Once you start shooting that way, you get really spoiled. And once you start shooting with another camera, it almost feels like you're going back to the past. And another reason why I can't recommend it is because they're out of stock. So everywhere, they're probably, planning the second iteration of the A1. And another honorable mention that I do want to talk about is the Sony A9 Mark III, their newest camera. Obviously, that is also an expensive camera. It's $6,000. But wow, you get 120 frames per second continuous shooting. So from 30 frames, they jumped 4 times that. They just went crazy over. And it's the best in class speed, out of any full frame cameras. It's got a full frame global shutter. So it doesn't even have a mechanical shutter anymore because it doesn't need it. It's full frame global shutter. That means your sensor is reading out the full sensor every time. It doesn't have a rolling shutter, and that opens up a lot of new possibilities with action photography, with flash photography, but it's in its own different class. If you're a sports photographer, that's probably the camera that you want. So that is a very, very niche type of camera. So that about does it for my recommendations. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, or if you have any beef with whatever I said, you can say that too. It's a free country. So go ahead and feel free to discuss that. I'd love to answer any of your questions, but thanks so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.